First question is, what might your name be?
My name is Helen Kraatz, and I've lived in Akron for many, many years. I've lived in the house that I'm in on Hart Street for 63 years already.
Holy cow. Nice to meet you. Ms.
Nice to
Kraatz.
meet you, Ashley.
What was your occupation?
I worked at the Bank of Akron for 32 years. Worked there when I first came out of college and worked for about 3 years. And then back in those years, when you were going to have a family, you didn't work. You just thought, well, I'm beginning to show that I'm going to have a family, and I better just not work anymore. So I worked until Labor Day, and then I left, and my son was born the last day of December that year. And I did not go back to work for 16 years. And then I knew I had to help put 2 children through college, that I better get back to work and help. So I did, and I went right back down to the Bank of Akron.
What was the Bank of Akron like?
At the time I worked there, there were 6 employees. Now I can't even tell you how many there are, but there are many, many. But I started out with 4 men and 1 other lady and myself.
Could you tell us more about the Bank of Akron? What was it like and everything?
Well, of course, we didn't have any computers. We had a bookkeeping machine that I used to run to post the ledgers on, the accounts. And we had big bookkeeping books that we recorded some things in. And all the checks that were going to the bank, to Liberty Bank in Buffalo, were all recorded by hand, by pencil, on a piece of paper, and it had a carbon with it and a piece that folded over, and the strip that folded over was the strip that went in. And all of that was done by hand. You couldn't possibly do all the checks that go through the bank now by hand, but we listed them all by hand. Just sat and listed them.
About how long did it take?
Oh, of course it depends on your volume of business for the day, but probably half an hour to an hour, depending on how much was going through at that particular day.
About how many checks went through a day? Like estimation about how many checks went through a day?
Oh, between 50 and 100, I bet.
Wow.
Because we also drew on Chase National, too, which is in New York.
That's pretty interesting.
It was a good place to work. I loved it. And I worked in bookkeeping always by choice because I wanted to. And when I went back in 1957, August of 57, I did a lot of things then with the safety deposit boxes, that type of thing. Took care of the overdrafts, all that kind of stuff.
About the Bank of Akron, what was your fondest memory of that bank?
All the lovely, lovely people I worked for through the years. Mr. Anderson, which was Arthur Anderson, Arthur Berg, William Smith, Cecil Shepard, Alberta Roach, all lovely, lovely people to work for. Helpful, interesting, just a nice group of people. And I liked the people that came in that I had to do business with. They were all interesting and very fine people too, for the most part. Once in a while you'd run onto one that could be just plain miserable, but basically they were fine, fine people to deal with.
Were the people sometimes can be, okay, let me rephrase this question. When you were still working at the Bank of Akron, about how long did it take you to get to know those people?
To get to know them,
Yeah, like when you worked with them, how long did it take you, like, to get to know them? Did you do anything to get to know them, talk to them, like make
well, you were
friends?
dealing with the people that I worked with all day long, every day, and so you got to know them. And of course, in a small town like this, I knew most of them before I went down there to work. So, you just knew them, you know, but you didn't have a lot of time for a lot of conversation. You were working. You did your job, spoke when spoken to, and worked the rest of the time, you know. You were helpful where you could be. What else?
Are you still working there?
No. No. I retired in January of 1984. So I've been retired almost 20 years.
That's a long time.
Yes, it is. I'm a very old lady.
Anything else you would like to add, like, about your, like, past? What was your fondest memory of your past history?
I've liked every stage of life as I've gone through it. I really don't want to go back and repeat any of it, but every stage of life that I've gone through has been interesting. I loved working at the Bank of Akron. It's the only job I ever had. It was just where I wanted to be and the type of thing I liked to do. I didn't want to deal with the public as close as being a teller. I much rather worked up in the bookkeeping, which is exactly where I stayed forever on purpose. And I enjoyed very much my contact with the public that I had from that place. As I said, I dealt with overdrafts a lot, so I very often had people with problems and lack a little money, you know, and you'd call them and talk to them and remind them. It was interesting.
Did you make quite a lot of phone calls when you said you called them and reminded them?
Some days. End of the week, maybe.
I heard you lived on a farm.
Yes, I did.
What was your farm like?
The farm was just a general farm. Had some cows, and some chickens, and some pigs, and 3 horses at one time. And then we ended up with 2. I had a big collie shepherd dog that I loved. I had cats. We grew lots and lots of fruits and lots of vegetables. And one of my jobs as a little child, really, was picking things. I remember one day I went into my mother and I said, "I'm picking the string beans, Mom, and I need something to put them in. Can I have that big oval clothes basket?" And she said, "Well, yes, but do you need something that big?" "Well, that's what I'd like to use." When I got the beans picked, I had a big oval clothes basket full of beans. And she came out and she looked at them and she said, "Well, I wasn't really anticipating that many, Helen, but I guess we better get out our knives and go to work at them." I was probably 7 at the time.
Wow. How did you manage that, carrying that old basket full
Well, I
of
had a
beans?
grandfather that I adored, and he lived with us. And he would come around and he'd say, "Can I help you carry that? Can I do this for you? I'll be back in a few minutes and help you. I have to go do something else, but I'll come back and help you in a few minutes." And he did.
What a trusting grandfather.
Mm.
So, do you have anything else to add about farm? Anything else?
Well, back in those years, of course, my mother canned a great deal. And as I said, I picked a lot of the stuff, and then we would can it. And of course, you weren't freezing those days. You didn't have freezers. You canned. You washed them and cut them all up and put them in quart jars and boiled them, and on the hot water method. And we had a big orchard, so we had lots of apples and pears and prunes and the whole bit. A general farm back in those years. Now we're talking back in the 1920s, 1930s. A general farm then had raised some wheat and some oats and some barley, once in a while a little buckwheat, and you fed your own animals. You really tried to make your farm self-sufficient to take care of your family. You didn't necessarily farm to sell a lot of things. You just really wanted to maintain your own family. And so when the Depression came along, because we were in a farm, I never as a child sensed that we were in a depression, really, because there was all of his eggs, there were all of his chickens to be killed and eaten, and we always had our own pigs, and so we had plenty of food, and my mother canned a great deal, so there was plenty of that kind of thing, and she sewed so she could make me some clothes once in a while, so I never felt as if I had been through a depression. I know some of my friends think, oh, we came through a depression and it was so hard. But being on a farm, I did not sense that, because I'm sure my mom and dad had trouble making ends meet sometimes, but I never really sensed it as a fourth, fifth, sixth grader. Excuse me. And of course, I went to a district school too for the first 6 years. Then I came down to Akron in 7th grade, only because my parents thought I would get a little better foundation for high school if I came down and got acquainted with some of the young people and the teachers and the system. So I came down to Akron to school when I started 7th grade.
What was school like to you?
What was school like? I enjoyed school very, very much. I wasn't a A++ student, but I enjoyed it. I was a, well, they used to have a friend who says that C students are the salt of the earth. I was a little above a C, but anyway, it was just, I enjoyed school very much, and I was very active. I did many, many, many things in school.
Were you in any sports at all?
Oh, I played a little baseball. That was about it. Basketball. In season was not a real sportsman.
To wrap this interview up, what was it like to spend your time counting other people's money and not being allowed to take it home with you?
Well, because I worked in bookkeeping, I didn't get to counting the money, my dear. But that's a hard one to answer. It never really bothered me because I knew it wasn't mine. So it wasn't any temptation. So, anything more?
Well, thanks for coming. No, I have no other questions, but thanks for coming. It was very nice meeting you.
Thank you.
And I enjoyed your time and effort for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I enjoyed it too, except I had to think so hard.
It's okay. Hi, I'm Shan Seville. Welcome to
I'd like to welcome you to Akron's 21st Century History Club. Here's some water if you need it. You can stop anytime you want. I have quite a few questions for you, but first I have to introduce you. So what is your name?
I'm John Eckerson. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Good.
Okay, so what was your occupation?
I was a teacher here for 21 years and the assistant high school principal for 22 more.
Worked a long time here. Was it this high school or was it?
It was the old original building over toward downtown. That was all there was. There was a
Okay. I heard there was a fireplace in the school. Do you remember that?
Yes, that was in our kindergarten. As a matter of fact, when I was in kindergarten, we used to have papers rolled out on the floor, rolls of paper, and we had to lay down on the paper and take a nap.
So it worked?
Huh? Did it what?
Did it work? Like, could you
Oh, I
name
guess
it?
so. I guess so, you know. I started school here in 1926, I think.
Probably good for all those cold Akron nights and days right now. So you lived here your whole life?
Just about, except for college and war years. Yep.
What made you decide to stay here?
When my mother died and my father wanted me to come home from Massachusetts, where I was working, and help raise my little brother, who was 12 years younger, I came home and I worked for a construction company, except one day my little brother came home from school and was talking about his science teacher, who I guess was losing it. So I spoke to the principal, Mr. Allen, and said in April, I said, I would come over and substitute for him if you'd like. Mr. Allen said that would be fine, and I stayed 43 more years.
That's a good way to get a job. You mentioned the war. Would that be World War II?
World War II. Mm-hmm.
Did you fight in Europe or
No,
the
I
Pacific?
I didn't fight anywhere except at Curtis Wright Aviation Company up near the Buffalo Airport. I helped to move airplanes around and get them built and so forth.
Okay. You know Ackerson Avenue, right along Bloomingdale Avenue?
Yes, I'm familiar with it. It's spelled the same as my name.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you have any idea how that got named
I
that way?
think it was from my great-great-grandfather, John Eckerson. I think.
You think?
There's nobody alive that can tell me now.
Well, on your preliminary questionnaire, you said the Methodist church fire affected you. Why?
Because I was a member, not a member, but I was in that church from the time I was practically old enough to walk around, and it was just like home to me. My mother was church organist there all of her life.
What year was that in?
And the fire?
Yeah.
I think it was 1944. Two. I guess it was two. Great. No, as a matter of fact, I was hitchhiking home from Cornell University and got a ride with a man who, when I told him I was from Akron, he said, "There was quite a fire you had yesterday." I said, "What fire?" He said, "Well, the Methodist church burned to the ground." And that's how I found out about it. I didn't get to see it. My mother saw it, and she stood in Russell Park, watched the fire burn, watched the belfry go, and the church bell way in the belfry fell way down into the cellar
Wow.
with a big clank, I guess.
That would have been so horrible to watch.
It was, I
Amazing.
presume.
Okay, is there any memories you'd like to talk about when you worked here at the high school?
Oh, there were several things. I think I got along with most of the students. I was rather strict. I was supposed to be. The one thing that sticks in my mind is the day I caught some youngster with a pipe bomb. It was about 6 inches long, and I didn't know he had it till it exploded over in the gymnasium building, which was in the high school at the time. Didn't hurt anybody. He used it in an empty corridor down in the back of the gym. But that, I never forget that. I'm sure of that.
It actually exploded?
Yeah, he set it off, yeah.
How'd you catch him with it?
I had seen, somebody had told me he had it during the day in his pocket. It's about 6 inches long. And I don't know how I happened not to get it away from him before he set it off, but, or maybe I had him set it off. I've forgotten. We're going back a ways now, you know. In fact, I'm so used to this building, the old building, that I spent 56 years of my life walking up and down the same hallways. 56 years, half a century.
So what do you think when you see the school now? How extended?
Oh, I get lost when I come to visit now because it's so much bigger than it used to be.
Barely remember this, so you're at the school.
Oh, I had one of the first camera clubs. I had an audiovisual aids club. We had the equipment in those days was two big 35 millimeter cameras, motion picture machines, and that was about it. I think what I ought to tell you, you mentioned my not being, or I mentioned not being in the service, the armed service,
Yeah.
because I couldn't go. I was made 4F because I had a punctured eardrum. And at that time, I wasn't a good candidate to go overseas and be gassed when the gas would go through my ear into my body, so they wouldn't take me. And all my buddies went, all my friends I grew up with and went to high school here with, went to the service, and I had to hang around home. So as a result, I got to run the Boy Scout troop. I was the only one around. Yeah.
You mentioned you were vice principal. Did you ever make it to principal status?
I did for a short period of time. There was a time when they hired a principal who came here and worked about 4 months and decided he couldn't do it anymore, so I filled out the year as the principal, but that was just a short term.
Besides the visual aids club and the camera club, did you run any other activities?
Oh yes, I was a class advisor
Which
for
class?
2 or 3 senior classes, yeah.
Did you get involved with the sports?
No, I didn't really. No, I was too busy to be in sports. Even when I was in high school, I worked all my spare time rather than get into sports, although I guess I could have. I was big enough, strong enough.
During your years here as a student, did you did you get involved in any of the activities here?
Oh yes, I was in the senior play. I had the lead part. I've forgotten the name of the play, but I was in the senior play and sang in the glee club. I like to sing, still do.
I love singing.
Good for you.
About your music.
Oh yes, I was a drum player. I played in the school band. I played in the small orchestra that about 8 of us youngsters had. As a matter of fact, one New Year's Eve, I played in what's now the Akron House in a little band in 1937. Speaking of long ago.
How long did you play the drums?
I played the drums all the way through high school, through college, and then in the Akron Village Band for 15 years.
Sorry, I'm screwing up. Historian, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, but I think this is I'd like to have everybody know that this is a fine school system. I thought it was good when I was here, and I think it's good right now. As a matter of fact, I'm quite proud to have graduated from here. Do you like it?
Yeah, I love it.
That's good, good.
Well, I'd like to thank you for coming here and sharing your time with us.
Well, it's been my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.
A district school is a one-room schoolhouse in a certain neighborhood. The one that I went to is District Number 9. It's up on Route 5. I don't know whether you know about the Grant Club, but between what we used to call the Grant Club and Murray's Corners, which would be Route 93, the Akron Road, and go east, and it's down there almost to where the stoplight is. It's on the right-hand side. It has been turned into a gift shop, and I don't know whether that is still being active or not. But the schoolhouse itself was the middle portion of that gift shop. We had one teacher, and it was Miss Nell Brown, who came down to Akron about 2 years behind me, and I came down in 7th grade. She came down about 2 years later and taught here for the rest of her career. She was an excellent teacher. The floors were oiled. We had a round stove in the middle of the, well, not really the middle of the room, up toward the front a little bit, but in the middle. And her desk was there, and we had a piano, and we had several desks, and at the time I was at school, there were probably between 15 and 20 of us in that district school. Armistice Day probably meant more to us than it means to you young people, because you get the day off. So I don't think you pay a lot of attention to it sometimes. What we used to do is she would say, now at 11 o'clock, we're going to put our hands on the desk and we're going to sit quietly, and then I'm going to give a little prayer, and we are going to think about the men who served in the wars. And we would keep our eye on that clock, and of course it was an old pendulum clock that really chimed the hours, kept us knowing what time of day it was. And when it got toward 11, we would all close our books up and sit with our hands very nicely folded in front of us. And she would do a little reading, and then we would be very, very quiet. And then when the time was all over after 11 o'clock, right at 11 is when she would do this. And then she would give a little prayer. And that was Armistice Day. It meant a great deal to us. Something else we used to celebrate was, I can't think of the proper name for it, Arbor Day, which was early in May, probably about the 1st, although they never called it May Day. It was Arbor Day. And we used to that day go down into the woods, and once we could pick a few wildflowers then, and they weren't all restricted at that point. And we would find a little tree down there someplace, and we would bring it up and plant it in the schoolyard. And one of the boys used to love to get into the leeks. You know what leeks are? It's a very strong smelling onion family. No. Very strong. And about 2 of them or 3 of them would always get into the leeks. And of course that worked real good, because when they got back up in the classroom, they weren't allowed back in, and Miss Brown would say, "You have to go home for the rest of the day. We can't tolerate this smell." So also there was, in the wintertime, an ice skating pond across the road, and we could, at recess and during the noon hours, we could go over there and skate if we wanted to, or, you know, just run and slide on the ice, that type of thing. What else can I tell you? We had cloakrooms, of course. which were cold usually because they were shut off from the rest of the one room. We had little bathrooms in the back of the room. My mother used to think it was nice to send down hot soup in the wintertime. And she would make a great big kettle of soup, and my dad would take it down and have it hot for lunchtime. And she'd send the dishes and everything with it. And it was wonderful to have that nice hot soup come in the cold, cold winter day. And she probably would send cookies with it too. So about once every other week or so, we'd have nice hot soup that my mom made and sent down to the whole school. What else can I think of? Anybody have any more questions that I can answer? School ages probably ran from about 5 till, I will bet you some of those older boys were about 18. And Miss Brown taught all the subjects. And well, back to my own little history. My sister was 6.5 years older than I, and of course she went on down to school, and when I'm a little afterthought, and when I just wanted to go to school so badly, because of course there were only the two of us, and I spent a lot of time, as I told you, with a grandfather that I adored. I wanted so much to go to school, and my mother contacted Miss Brown, and she said, Helen is so unhappy at home and just so bored. Can she come down to school for a few days? And she's such a little busybody, she wouldn't be happy there to have to sit and be quiet. So I think about 2 days and she'll be all through with it. She won't want any part of it. So Miss Brown said, sure, send her down. So I went down, and I went a week and apparently liked it. I went another week and liked it, and then my mother went down and she said, she's too young. She can't be in school. This is not working. I thought she'd hate it, and she doesn't hate it. She seems to enjoy it. And Miss Brown said, and she says, I'm going to keep her home. And Miss Brown said, she's good. She's a good little girl, and she listens and she likes it. You can't take her out of school now. She's already sampled school. You can't do that to her. So that is the reason, really, that my mom sent soup and stuff down, because she just thought, I need this, you know. Helen needs this warm stuff and so forth. But I graduated from high school when I was just 17. And my birthday's in May. So really, I should not have been in school when I was, because of course I didn't go to kindergarten. I went right into first grade. And another thing we did, I lost an aunt up in Pennsylvania I was about a second grader. And my mom and dad went up to be helpful, and of course took me with them. And Miss Brown sent all of the tests and stuff for the June exams along and let me take them up there and then just mail them back to her. Can you believe that? Oh, there are lots of things that I sat here and thought, but I don't know. We used to do book reports. We used to do reports out of what they called I want to call it a normal magazine, Normal. Then they would have pictures of art pictures, and there would be a whole page of them, and you could cut these little pictures out, then you could mount them on your notebook, and then you wrote about this particular thing. Right now I can't come up, or like the Blue Boy, Or what's the name of the little one with the little boy with the torn hat? It's a beautiful little painting. And I can't tell you the name of it, but I can remember doing that one. I can remember the article. I can remember the picture. Let's see, we used to play baseball at our school recesses. Actually, we got a very good education in that grade school. But of course, it's because we had an excellent teacher. That's what did it. Miss Brown was an excellent teacher, and